In 1929, Wall Street was worth more than $87 billion, a symbol of American power and prosperity. By 1932, the value had collapsed to less than $19 billion. Families that had lived in comfort lined up for bread. Banks failed, factories went silent, and 25% of workers lost their jobs. This is the story of how the world's strongest economy fell apart and what it took to rebuild it. Before the fall came the illusion. The 1920s in America were the age of glitter and speed, jazz music and skyscrapers. Industrial output soared by more than 60%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped from 63 points to over 381 points by September 1929, and it felt unstoppable. Banks encouraged everyone to buy stocks, even if they didn't have cash. Buy on margin, they said. Put down 10% and borrow the rest. It worked beautifully until it didn't. By 1929, more than $8.5 billion had been borrowed just to gamble on Wall Street, more than the entire US federal budget that year. And farmers, meanwhile, were already in trouble. Prices of wheat and corn had fallen almost by half after World War I, but Wall Street didn't care. The money was in stocks, not in soil. The boom was built on debt, speculation, and confidence. Three things that never last forever. And by late summer, whispers of doubt began to circulate. Some economists warned that prices were inflated far beyond earnings, but few wanted to believe them. The champagne was still flowing, and no one realized that the music was about to stop. On October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, the market opened with panic. 13 million shares were traded in one day. Bankers rushed to the floor of the exchange, trying to calm down people by buying blue-chip stocks. And it only worked for a few days. And then came Black Tuesday, October 29. 16 million shares were sold, more than anyone thought possible. General Electric fell from $396 to $168. US Steel dropped from $262 to $22. The Dow Jones crashed from 381 points to 230 by the end of the day, and it would keep falling for 3 more years. And fortunes vanished overnight. Over $30 billion of market value vanished within weeks, nearly as much as the cost of World War I for the United States. Bankers, brokers, even small investors alike were ruined. Some walked out of Wall Street that day with everything gone. Homes, savings, future, everything. The crash wasn't just financial, it was also psychological. For the first time, Americans realized the system that they trusted was built on air. The crash, however, should have been a warning, but it became a chain of reactions. Banks had poured customers' savings into the market, and when stocks collapsed, so did the banks. Between 1930 and 1933, over 9,000 banks failed. There was no insurance or safety net. When a bank closed its doors, your money simply disappeared. Factories had no one to sell to, and workers had no paychecks to spend. Industrial production fell by half. By 1933, 15 million Americans, roughly 1 in 4 workers, were unemployed. In Detroit and Chicago, unemployment hit nearly 50%. Families lost their homes and set up shacks made of wood scraps and cardboard, nicknamed Hoovervilles, after the president they blamed for doing nothing. In New York City alone, more than 200,000 people were homeless, and soup kitchens ran by churches and charity stretched around city blocks. Children fainted in schools from hunger. The depression wasn't a distant statistic. It was the sound of fathers pacing at night, wondering how to feed their families in the morning. In 1931, a new disaster struck, not from Wall Street, but from the sky. Drought scorched the Great Plains, and years of overfarming left the topsoil exposed. Winds carried away millions of tons of dirt, turning the land into a wasteland. The Dust Bowl destroyed over 100 million acres of land across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, and black clouds of dust rolled as far as New York and Chicago. And farmers who had survived the price collapse now face ruins. Crops died, and entire towns were buried under dust. Many families fled west, chasing rumors of jobs in California. And by 1935, more than 200,000 Okies had migrated. Many ended up in roadside camps. President Hoover insisted that the crisis would fix itself. He opposed direct federal aid, called it socialism. But by 1932, the patience of the nation had snapped, and America was ready for new leadership. President Roosevelt took office in March 1933 with a promise. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. By then, nearly every bank in America had closed its doors. FDR's first act was to stop the bleeding. He declared a 4-day national bank holiday and passed emergency banking laws and assured the nation through radio. When the banks reopened, deposits returned and confidence was slowly restored. And then came the New Deal, a sweeping series of new programs aimed at relief and support. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, put young men to work, planting 3 billion trees and building parks. The Public Works Administration and Works Progress Administration created millions of jobs by creating roads, bridges, and public buildings. And by 1936, the economy had started to grow again. Industrial production rose by 50%, and unemployment dropped from 25% to 14%. It wasn't prosperity yet, but it was progress. The Great Depression didn't stop only at America's borders. It spread like a virus across the globe. World trade collapsed by over 60% between 1929 and 1933. In Germany, for example, unemployment soared past 30%. Poverty and hunger filled the streets, paving the way for Hitler's rise to power in 1933. In Britain, factories closed as exports dried up. Around the world, governments turned inward, raising tariffs and restricting imports, actions that only deepened the crisis. The Depression even reshaped politics. Democracy wavered and dictators rose, and the old global order began to crumble. What began as a stock market crash in New York eventually became one of the root causes of World War II. By the late 1930s, the US economy was stronger but not yet healed. Roosevelt's programs had saved millions from hunger and starvation, but unemployment still hovered over 15%. Critics accused him of creating too much government, and supporters said he saved capitalism itself. And then came the war. World War II turned America into an industrial giant again. The nation became the arsenal of democracy, producing planes, tanks, and ships around the clock. And by 1943, unemployment had fallen under 2%. Factory wages doubled, and the Depression was finally over, but not through policy alone, but through total mobilization. The war effort pumped over $300 billion into the economy, an unimaginable sum at that time. And when peace returned, America rose richer and stronger than ever before. The Great Depression left scars deeper than statistics can show. It changed how Americans viewed money, government, and each other. It led to stronger banking regulations and the creation of FDIC and the Securities and Exchange Commission to prevent that kind of reckless speculation. It also helped reshape lives. Generations who lived through it became better at saving, and they taught children that nothing is guaranteed. The fear of losing everything never quite disappeared. Even now, when market wobbles or recession strikes, we hear echoes of 1929. Economists still debate its causes, but one truth endures: prosperity built on illusion always collapses. The Great Depression was more than an economic disaster. It was a test of character. It showed that wealth can vanish overnight, but courage and leadership can rebuild what's lost. And out of the ashes, America found not just recovery, but reinvention. History doesn't just repeat, it reminds. And the Great Depression still whispers its warnings. Beware of bubbles, protect the vulnerable, and never forget how quickly the dream can fade. This is the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have more ideas for me to cover in the next episodes, leave it in the comments. Until next time.